Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Mayers from WisPolitics.com and WisBusiness.com, and welcome to our June 11th virtual event. COVID-19, trade tensions, turbulent markets spells trouble for Wisconsin ag. This isn't going to just be a negative discussion, but agriculture has been upset by a lot of factors here over the past couple of years, and things seem to have heightened. And that's why we wanted to have another one of these agriculture-centered events. We did one in the fall at UW-Platteville, and one was done earlier in Wausau last year. And so we wanted to do it again. So first off, I want to thank all the farmers out there who are listening or who will see this rebroadcast, because without you, we wouldn't have food in our grocery stores. We wouldn't have food in the restaurants that are reopening. And so thanks for persevering through tough times. Also want to thank our sponsors and partners for this event. We couldn't have done it without you. This event is part of the East Asia Now series from the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And WIPS, the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Services, is also a partner. Our event sponsors, and we thank you very much, the Wisconsin Farm Bureau, the Wisconsin Biofuels Association, and WAGIT, the Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training. I also, before I turn it over to our moderator, Pam Jahnke, who you all know, I want to thank our panelists for participating today. We have Senator Janis Ringhand, Democrat from Evansville, and she's a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee. We have Cal Dalton. He's a member of the board of United Wisconsin Grain Producers, an ethanol plant in Friesland, and a corn grower and cattle farmer from Endeavor. We have Dan Smith, who's the president and CEO of the Cooperative Network. And we have UW-Madison economist, Ian Coxhead. So now I'm going to turn it over to our able moderator, the famous farm babe, Pam Jahnke. Take it away, Pam.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. And it is nice to be a part of this continuing conversation. We started this series at a time when the biggest issue that Wisconsin agriculture was concerned about was our trade relations with China. But boy, how our world has changed. And our distinguished panelists are going to give you some insight into where we stand as of this date and how Wisconsin agriculture, again, is continuing to just try to make its way through. That being said, I want to start with that kind of a look back, if you will, end of 2019. The optimism Wisconsin agriculture had going into 2020, and then bam, COVID-19. Ian, you and I were on the very front end of these conversations when we were meeting up in Wausau, the Platteville conversations and so forth. Give me your sense on what's changed for Wisconsin agriculture, its economy, its opportunities since we started this series back in 2019. Like I said, you and I were talking a lot about China as a marketing opportunity, and then all of a sudden the world was disrupted with COVID-19. What's your perspective on it today?
Hi, Pam. Thank you very much. And well, we're cursed with the curse of living in interesting times, aren't we? We thought it was interesting last summer when we got together in Warsaw to talk about the so-called trade wars with China and in particular, the effect of China's retaliatory tariffs applied to U.S. agricultural exports, including ginseng. At the time, that seemed like a very big deal, and indeed it was. But that, of course, has been completely swamped by what we see now in the global pandemic.
And those markets are going to take some time to recover. Do you remain optimistic, Ian, after what we saw with policy development with China, even despite COVID? Do you remain optimistic, or give me your sense of where we go from here?
Well, Pam, I think we have to take a pretty broad view to get the perspective that we need for this. First thing is that the United States recovery from the pandemic, when it takes place, is going to be slow. And it's going to be, importantly, it's going to be slower than in most countries elsewhere in the world. A couple of exceptions, but generally slower. And that's because the United States is almost unique among countries in having no science-based policy, no deliberate policy response. We don't have a coherent federal public health strategy for dealing with this. The federal stimulus spending has been embroiled in politics, and in particular, the Senate at the federal level has so far resisted making grants to the local governments, state and local governments, who are, of course, the first responders in terms of providing safety nets and other economic support to states. And then, of course, the global economic recovery, which will outpace that in the United States, is not really going to benefit us all that well, because the administration has turned its back on international trade. So those three things, I think, do not bode well for us in the near term.
Senator Ringhand, let's talk a little bit about what's happening right here in Wisconsin. Again, for people that are failing to realize, agriculture is the state's #1 economic driver, COVID-19 or not. We have seen just a complete rewriting of history for Wisconsin agriculture. In the meantime, the state has been trying to figure out, with such a large problem ahead of it, what it can do to assist our farmers in just getting by. What's that conversation like down at the state capitol? You know, normally, and I say this in an unnormal time, normally Wisconsin agriculture is a very bipartisan issue. What are you hearing down at the state capitol as far as current implementation of assistance and future ideas on projects that we may be working on?
Well, thank you, Pam. Well, right now, as you know, we are not at the Capitol because it is closed, but we are trying to communicate through social media and Skype and Zoom, and we have had a few meetings on that. And I don't recall exactly how many bills related to agriculture were in the final session that we did not have in March. So there are probably some bills hanging out there that the Assembly would have passed that the Senate did not. And of course, well, actually, I was on the Task Force 2.0 for the dairy industry, and we were very optimistic about some of the ideas that came forward. And one of them actually did, the Dairy Innovation Hub, was approved. So that was a very positive issue. But since the COVID hit, it's kind of turned everything upside down. And the state, through the governor, has been able to provide some funding, which will just start next week. And that is going to be $50 million through the CARES program that the federal government provided. And that application process starts next Monday, June 15th. And anyone who's interested in applying can go on the Department of Revenue's webpage, which is revenue.wi.gov. The application time is from the 15th of June to the 29th of June. And anyone who is in the income range, gross income of $35,000 to $5 million, can apply for funding. And the funds available per farmer are $1,000 to $3,500. So it's not a huge program, but anything that's out there does help. So that is worth checking into. And you're also aware of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, CFAP, which we use a lot of acronyms. And Wisconsin has been extremely successful in getting funding out to its farmers. We have about $108,300,000 worth of funding that we have received. We're only second to Iowa, who has about $112 million. So we're not too far behind. And that program, the information is updated every Monday. So people can check into, just put CFAP into the browser on your computer and you can see where that's at. And another one is the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. Those are through the Small Business Association, and small businesses, small farmers can also apply for that going to the SBA webpage. You can get up to a $10,000 forgivable loan. So a lot of efforts are being made. They're all going to take time. And it's parceled out person by person. So it's not a huge volume for anyone, but yet many people are eligible. So it's certainly worth checking into.
Very good. And Senator, for the producers that I've had a chance to visit with since CFAP has started issuing those checks, believe me, they're able to breathe a little bit. We'll probably talk more about that with one of our growers in just a moment. Dan Smith, I want to go to you, my friend. Reason being that we're putting an awful lot of emphasis on our individual farms, and rightly so. But those individual farms are also very dependent on a lot of our agribusiness cooperatives for getting supplies out there, especially at this time of the year. You know, talk about, and the perfect storm has been used time and time again, but for farmers, it really could have been that way. It was that way. Most farmers had their spring inputs in the shed before everything started kind of melting around their ears, but still responding to their needs and making sure that our cooperatives are on safe financial footing is something that's not getting discussed very much. What's the state of our cooperative industry?
Well, thank you, Pam, for that. You know, it's important to realize how closely connected all of our rural businesses and our rural communities are to agriculture. So when something impacts agriculture, it has such a ripple effect through our communities. Cooperative Network works with 250 cooperatives from 12 different business sectors across Wisconsin and Minnesota. So from finance to insurance to farm supply, dairy processing, housing cooperatives. And I can tell you that all 12 of those sectors for the last 5 years has struggled with the downturn in our rural economy and agriculture economy. So you mentioned before, Pam, how optimism had returned towards the end of last year as we look towards new trade developments and that moving forward. And it's amazing how quickly we lost that optimism when COVID came along. And we talked about two major things since COVID really became part of our lives. One is disruption to the plans that we had all the way from the farm through the processing, distribution to the grocery store. Disruption in the energy sector, disruption in all the cooperatives, the financial, farm financial system that feeds agriculture. All of them scrambled to react to an unprecedented and unforeseen event. And this came at a time, one where that optimism was returning because we thought we had gotten through the worst of the last 5 years of the downturn, whether that be weather impacts or the trade negotiations or whatever. And then moving forward at the exact time of year, as you mentioned, Pam, where we were getting ready to go to the field. And while a lot of those supplies were already in the machine shed on the farm, we were still scrambling for procedures to who's going to run the tender trucks, who's going to run the applicators in the field. So our farm supply cooperatives, moving product to the farmer during planting, they were deeply impacted. And on the other side of that, our dairy processors, our meat plants, all of those that were taking the product from the farm, they faced that same disruption. We've learned a lot in a very short period of time, Pam. But one of those is how to be prepared for that disruption. We'll need to do a better job of that in the future. But the other thing, I think we really have a new definition of what is essential in our society and our economy. And even the consumer going to the grocery store, having to limit their purchases or seeing empty shelves now has a new appreciation of what is essential in American rural Midwest.
Agreed, Dan. I don't think that any of us would have fathomed that we would live in a time when multiple shelves and showcases in our grocery store would be empty or we would be limited. I mean, it just is not fathomable, you know, and it's also particularly hard to handle when you're out there on the front line producing those raw goods and yet finding your markets unavailable because of supply chain issues that were almost directly connected with employees that were impacted by COVID. Cal Dalton, you're on with us. I want to go to another issue that Dan and his group at Cooperative Network have been vocalizing for quite a while, and it really rings true now. Take a look at what we're doing, folks. We are communicating virtually. That's fine and dandy, perhaps if you're in a metropolitan area, but I was teasing Cal about, did you feed the squirrels? Because in Endeavor, high-speed broadband is not a guarantee. Cell phone is not a guarantee. So Cal, let's go to that first. How has your world as a Wisconsin corn grower, a beef producer, a fella that's got his pulse on the ethanol industry, just give me a sense. What were you feeling Christmas time? And then what were you feeling like, say, end of April?
At Christmas time, things were getting a little more optimistic out here on the farm. Our prices had come up. We had pretty decent prices for cattle starting to first part of January. And I felt kind of a renewed energy after going through a downturn from the China embargoes and stuff that were last summer and fall. And then COVID hit, and it pretty much destroyed our markets. We saw almost $1 drop in corn prices, over $1.50 drop in soybean prices, almost $20 a hundredweight drop in cattle. You know, we're basically, the crop we put in this year, we put in below the cost of what it cost us to produce it. So, you know, that's the challenge. You know, farmers are optimistic. We hope that we can, you know, get ourselves worked out of this. But I know early on, before COVID was a real problem, our banker, as well as a lot of our friends and neighbors bankers, all met with them to get them set up financially to weather the storms. And I'm glad they did, because it helped us out a lot. On another note, I didn't realize how isolated we were. We worked every day here on the farm, 7 days a week. And you know, we don't see a lot of people. It's surprising. And when we do have meetings and stuff, going to virtual meetings was a little change for us. I mean, that's some of the socialization that we have on the farm, is going to some of these producer meetings and stuff. And when they were omitted or called off because of COVID, then we found ourselves even more isolated.
Right. And that dependence on that internet signal for any kind of communication whatsoever, Cal, you're not by yourself. I know you talk with a lot of other growers. Have they experienced some real challenges trying to get business done, trying to secure contracts, or maybe as important, trying to fill out all the federal or state paperwork to try to qualify for aid? Not all of your buddies have high-speed internet.
No, that's very true. I talked to a lot of farmers, and they've got dial-up slow speed internet, and that's what's really hurting us out in rural America, is the ability to communicate with not only our fellow farmers, but also our FSA offices that are closed, our supply people. Used a lot of cell phone time this year. You know, and we didn't have any glitches. Like I said, we had a lot of the stuff on hand before COVID really hit, our seeds and a lot of our fertilizers bought. But, you know, as we go forward here, you know, we've experienced some delays in parts for our equipment. And I think that we'll see more and more of that as we go forward.
You know, back to you, Dan, on this one. How strong is the conversation now on working together to try to get a cohesive network of broadband internet statewide? It is not a small undertaking by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, even before COVID showed up, Pam, when I go around and ask our 250 cooperative managers across 2 states, what's keeping you up at night? I always got the same 3 answers from every one of them, regardless of what sector they serve. The first one was broadband. You can't run precision agriculture programs, so you cannot have a connected community in today's world without broadband access. And it's impossible to run a business without one. The second one was a talented, skilled, motivated labor force available to our cooperatives and our farmers in the rural communities. And then the third thing was profitability. Everything that we have faced in the last 5 years, you know, farmers being unable to pay their bills, all of those reverberate through the local economy, the local community, and they show up in the bottom line of the local cooperative. So just returning profitability to our rural economy, and along with developing labor, an educated, talented labor force, and then of course, broadband is the foundation for all of those things, Pam.
Right. Right. Yeah, I've been hearing it from a lot of folks that trying to do so many instructional videos for their employees or their incoming interns via the virtual world can be a challenge in and of itself. Janis, are you guys talking about broadband down at the Capitol? I know that the Senate Agriculture Committee has had this as a part of their constant conversation for a while, but boy, baby, I'll tell you, we got an exclamation point on it now.
Yes, it's been that way for a long time. And actually more money was made available last year to get additional broadband in. And what we wanted to do was to have at least 2 options for every community out there, so that you didn't have to rely on just one source of internet around your area, because it doesn't always work. We have such unusual terrain in Wisconsin. If you're in a hill or you're in a valley, you cannot get internet. And even where I live in southern Wisconsin, we have a lot of dead zones all over the place. So it has been a topic of discussion for quite some time. And I don't want to misquote how much money was made available, but there is state money available to expand internet. And definitely, hopefully, at least 2 sources in every area, so that people have a choice. They're not trapped into one option that may be more costly than what they can afford. That tends to be the issue. If you have dial-up, it's less expensive, but it's also very much less efficient. So it's definitely a topic. In fact, some of our more rural legislators from Northwest Wisconsin have really been beating the drum on that. And I understand why, because I have people as close to Madison as the village of Oregon who have problems, and people shake their head. How can that be? But it's true. We have a lot of dead zones.
Oh, listen, I'm on the west side of Madison. If I've got enough kids that are online gaming, or maybe not kids, I'll get to glitching here pretty soon. So no, your point's well taken. Hey, Ian, so we have talked about this before. How big a deal would it be if Wisconsin ended up with a nice, strong, cohesive internet blanket where we could do business and keep up to speed on what's happening with the international scene?
So that's a really interesting question, Pam. The people like me who study globalization think a lot about this, because when we talk about globalization, we first think about international trade, which has been going on, of course, a very long time and picked up a lot of speed in the last couple of 100 years. We think about the exchange of ideas, which has also been a really influential trend. And then the really big holdup has been the so-called exchange of people, or the movement of people around the world who facilitate both trade and spread of ideas, and therefore make everything profitable. And, you know, until just a couple of years ago, economists and others studying this would say, well, movement of people is going to be kind of slow to progress because people have got to get on planes and move around. It's costly, it's difficult, and all the rest. But, you know, we've really seen a huge transformation just in a few months in the way that business gets done. That's, I think, a tremendously interesting phenomenon. And so that translates into a much, much greater importance of access to broadband services for everybody, all the way down to the farm level as well. This is going to be the way that business gets done increasingly. And if you're not accessing the internet with adequate coverage, then of course, that's going to be a disadvantage.
Well, and like you said, it's not just about what's going on outside of Wisconsin. It's also some of those farm direct folks that are trying to stay connected with their consumers and customers. Ian, we started this conversation by referencing back to our conversations on these very topics in 2019, when we were beginning to watch the deal with China unfold. Can you update us from your perspective on what phase are we in? Are the phases holding together? I know from an agriculture perspective, we are continuing to hear export sales that go forward, but what's your perspective on how far along we are with all these phase integrations?
Yeah, thanks, Pam. So the big topic of conversation a year ago was, of course, the U.S. tariffs and Chinese retaliation on those tariffs. That was a very, very big deal. Since then, in January, we got the so-called Phase 1 trade deal with China that essentially secures a commitment from China to purchase dollar amounts of U.S. agricultural products, about 11 point something billion dollars this year and another 19 next year. Those are deals which will presumably go ahead, although I guess the environment in which they were struck and the environment that's evolved since then as well is not very promising, because the United States government has decided that bashing China is a good political strategy, maybe domestically more than internationally. And I think that doesn't really encourage the Chinese to cooperate on that particular front. However, if the Chinese stick to their agreement, then there will be quite a lot of extra demand for U.S. agricultural exports coming up over the next year or so. That would be a good thing. Longer term, not clear that this is going to be any kind of benefit, because this kind of trade deal, first of all, it's bounded. It's only 2 years. It's a managed trade deal. It's not about establishing the ground for healthy trade going forward. It's like compelling China to do something in the short term. So there's no long-term benefit that we can see from this kind of trade deal. That would require a very, very different trade policy stance on the part of the US government than we have seen over the last 2 years. So on top of trade wars, which hurt Wisconsin farmers pretty substantially, we've got this kind of Band-Aid approach of the Phase 1 trade deal, but it's literally a Band-Aid. It'll come off in the bathtub, and then we'll have to be looking for something else to cover up that particular wound. So I'm not very optimistic about that. I want to say something else too, and that this relates to my earlier comment that the United States recovery from COVID is going to be slow. And it's going to be slower relative to most of the rest of the world. And that's going to matter for the US economy. It's going to matter in particular for states like Wisconsin that have very high export exposure, and that's very much true of our agriculture as well. When we look around the world, we see that countries that adopted the right kinds of public health policies and economic strategies have recovered very quickly from the COVID pandemic. Those countries are geographically very much in East Asia, Southeast Asia. In fact, if we look at the so-called RCEP countries, that's the ASEAN countries, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, etc., plus China, South Korea, Japan, and Australia, New Zealand, so 15 countries in all, then they are far ahead of the rest of the world, not only in terms of their recovery from the COVID pandemic, but also in terms of their existing level of economic integration within themselves. Now, just to put that in perspective, that group of 15 countries is not just half the world's population, it's also 40% of world GDP, and it's growing much faster than the rest of the world, so that share is expanding over time. So let's think about what that means when the US is kind of locked down, unable to really get its economy going because of bad policies here, while the rest of the world is picking up. It's going to mean that that rapid recovery, regional specific rapid recovery in East and Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific is probably going to build on the trade deals that they already have, the trade partnerships they already have. Movement of people and goods and services will pick up faster within that region. And so there's going to be a lot of substitution as supply chains in that region begin to reorient themselves towards what are essentially more secure, less risky supply chain links, that is, within the region. So, you know, within that group of 15 countries, we've got a couple of very big agricultural exporters like Australia and New Zealand who can pick up markets that the United States is no longer able to serve for both political and pandemic reasons. So we've got to be a little bit, I think, pessimistic about how this is going to shape up in the long term. If the rest of the world says, well, the United States is not going to be a very reliable trade partner for both health and political reasons, then they have lots of other ways to configure their supply chains and their markets, and that will translate into long-term losses for United States exporters.
Dan, you've got a lot of cooperatives, a lot of agribusinesses that you work with that I bet we're starting to pivot a little bit in 2019, maybe taking a look at ramping up on particular product lines or something like that that might have found favor in the international marketplace. What are you hearing from those agribusinesses that had hoped they would find themselves perched in a little bit better position for international access in 2020?
You know, Pam, listening to the previous conversation there, it reminded me of something that Dr. David Cole from Virginia Tech, who I know a lot of you know, has said years ago in a presentation. He said, we need to be careful not to bet the farm on China. And I think that's very important for us, and that's really come to be factual during this time. We did see over-reliance, I would say, on our export markets, on our commodity production into an international marketplace that we assumed was always going to be there. And we did not foresee the impact of something such as an international pandemic having an impact on that. Looking at more of a diversified approach going forward, making sure that we have local and regional markets, strong domestic markets, new product development. You know, we have the greatest example of product development anywhere right here in Madison with the Center for Dairy Research on campus. Working with groups like that so that we're not always thinking that we can produce whatever we want and that the world will develop a market for that at a price that we can live with. And I think that's what Dr. Cole was talking about when he said, let's not bet the farm on China.
You know, I wish that more people had an opportunity to actually talk to farmers on how they approach all this, because it's one thing when you're a policy director or something like that. It's another thing when you're trying to put pieces together to keep a farm operating. Cal, how did you change your marketing strategy? Did you change your strategy for what you were going to plant based on the rumblings of business with China? Because you're one of those guys that is in Wisconsin, but you've got national connections, having been on the National Corn Growers Board, et cetera. Just give people a real world sense of how headlines like phase 1, phase 2 resonate with you and what you actually end up doing on the farm.
Yeah, Pam, I had talked to quite a few producers, not only here in Wisconsin, but all over the US from my corn grower connections. And they basically, a lot of them have reduced some of their corn acres because of the cost to put the crop in and the profitability that was there, and actually went to more soybeans to offset that. We've got some producers here in Wisconsin that planted more acres of hay this year. And we did the same thing on our farm. We added a few extra acres of hay. We went to more soybeans and less corn. And we're hoping that that was a good combination to kind of diversify our operation and make it a little more profitable.
Right, right. Now, you know, a lot of that corn might have been destined for our ethanol plants in Wisconsin. I believe we've got 9 ethanol plants. Cal, you're connected with United Wisconsin Grain in Friesland. Are all 9, they're not all up and running, are they, because of those poor margins?
Right, and that's, I'm actually this year now the elected president of the UWGP board, but I keep a pulse with Bob Welch and the Biofuels Association on what's going on with the other 9 plants in the state. 2 of them, one of them is the largest ethanol plant in the state, are completely shut down right now. And several of the other plants, including us for a while, were operating at less than full capacity. We dropped back to about 60%, which was what we had contracted in ethanol sales for the future. And we did get into some hand sanitizer, as well as some of the other plants in the state got into sanitizers and hand sanitizers, or as we call it, the industrial ethanol market, which actually was a little bit of a boost for us. We had to do some things different in the process to make the sanitizer. If you just took the fuel grade ethanol that we produced, it did not smell very good. So people don't like to put that on their hands if it doesn't smell good. And we had to use a different agent to get it so it would pass for the federal tobacco firearms people, as you know, we have to kind of get it so it's not pure moonshine. But you know, that's kind of what we did to get ourselves through. Our plant right now is back up to full production as driving has started to increase. Demand for fuel grade ethanol has increased, and the prices have increased, not back to the pre-COVID levels, but at least there's some value there. And you know, we're seeing other plants increase or start back up, but some of the ones that shut down may be shut down for quite a while.
Right, right. And kind of connecting the dots there, that the operation of those ethanol plants would generally be considered a bonus opportunity for corn growers that can market to them directly, correct?
That is correct. I mean, we lost probably a third of our corn market when the plants in Wisconsin shut down or slowed down. And it's hard to, you know, you got that corn carried out there either between the farmers with on-farm storage or the commercial operators. And so we've got this glut of corn that's going to be left over from the 2019 crop sitting in storage as we produce a 2020 crop. And if we've got good yields and a good crop coming in 20, financially, we're going to be in a world of trouble. And I think that's the same case nationwide, talking to some of my corn grower friends from around the country.
Yeah, I think you're right as far as the tail is concerned, and I'm sure Ian could school us all on that. But one thing that a lot of agriculture has been talking about, and we want to constantly bring this up to consumers, is the shelves are back being restocked. You have the opportunity to get out a little bit more, but Wisconsin agriculture is going to continue to see this whipsaw kind of reflex to the long-term ramifications of COVID and the market disruption. Let's talk a little bit about how we're all trying to get back to normal, so to speak. And I do appreciate questions from our audience. You can submit those. I'll do my best to facilitate on the go here. Let's talk a little bit about the measures that were put in place in Wisconsin. Janis, you were right down there when the marching orders were coming down. We're going where we've never gone before. Restrictions were put in place. Do you think that we are at the right stage now of allowing people access safely, trying to get the economy going? Should we be more aggressive on that? The audience seems to want to know, if we got more aggressive on opening up the economy, trying to allow people to resume more activities, would that help us as far as economics? I'll let you start, Janis, then Ian, you'll be up next.
Okay, Pam. We're really hopeful that we're doing the right thing. The stay-at-home order was lifted before the governor had planned on it. And I know that Governor Evers was basing all the decisions he made on science. And I think that's extremely important right now because this is such an unknown entity. And some of the states that did start opening up a little bit sooner are seeing some resurgence. I don't know how strong it will be. We are starting to open up around the state, and people have been a little bit cautious, which is okay. I think it's better to err on the side of caution than to get out in big crowds and find out that it's a mistake. But right in my home base in Rock County, we're ready to move on to the next step because the illnesses have subsided, the hospitals have capacity, the equipment is available. So we're going to take that next step. And I think it's necessary to do that because we cannot stay locked up forever, obviously. But there's always the concern that we're moving too fast, that people will get out and travel to areas, especially in the northern part of the state, that have not been heavily affected and take this with them. And those areas are not as well prepared to deal with the medical side of the situation. So here again, it's a big guessing game. Are we doing the right thing? Or are we doing the wrong thing? And I think the number one goal of the governor and the Department of Health and the legislators ourselves is to keep people healthy. We don't want to create havoc any worse than what it has been already. Keep people safe, make sure we have enough equipment. I think that's one of the biggest keys, is that we do have the equipment that's necessary if we do have a resurgence. And I was on a conference call with the governor a couple of weeks ago, and that was the question I asked him. How do you feel? Where are we at right now? Are we comfortable with the PPEs, with the medical facilities that are available? And he said, we may not be perfect, but we're much closer than we were at the start of this. So I think little by little, as long as people are respectful and mind the social distancing, wear masks, hopefully we'll be okay. But we have to start somewhere. And I think doing it slowly is the best option.
All right, Ian, we've been talking about how the world has handled COVID-19 and what we're doing here, not just in Wisconsin, but the United States. Should we be more aggressive? Should we take a look at the numbers on COVID cases increasing in particular the Southwest and the West and back off a little bit? And mostly, what is that doing to our economy?
Well, Pam, the public health questions are best answered by epidemiologists. I'm not qualified to do that. But I think everything that Senator Ringhand said, I think, is really just very sensible, very sound analysis and recommendations. I guess, a lot of the discussion about this, even now, even in June, is still getting framed in a very, I think, misleading way, the sort of lockdown or economy choice, as if this were really a choice. It's not. It's a false dichotomy. And I think what we heard from Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve yesterday, that this is not just the worst economic shock that we're experiencing in our lifetimes or have experienced in our lifetimes, but also that it's going to endure for a very long time. Well, the second of those statements, that we're going to be living with this for a very long time, is a function of getting away from the idea that it's either opening up the economy or fixing the disease. It's got to be both at the same time. And so, as Senator Ringhand said, that's tough. That means we've got to walk a line between partial opening and exercising discretion over how the economy gets going. But there's a real downside risk in saying we've got to open up the economy or else people are going to lose their businesses. Well, people are going to lose their businesses if we open up the economy and the disease is not under control. We have 14 million unemployed people in the country at the moment. That's a very big part of the US consumer market, which no longer has purchasing power. So if we can't solve that, then of course the economic recovery is going to be slower. It's going to be, the depth of the recession is going to be deeper. And all of that means that there is no dichotomy between the public health goal and the economic goal. I think, one thing that the state, not just the state government, but also key actors in the state, the agribusiness community, farmers themselves, voters themselves, we have a kind of a big advantage this year because Wisconsin is a swing state. And so people are going to be here a lot and they're going to be listening a lot and looking for votes. And so I think that this is a really good opportunity, particularly for the business community in Wisconsin, to convey to the federal government that what we need is more than just Band-Aids. Band-Aids are great. Transfers of federal funding are short-term fixes that will help in the short term. But in the long term, we've got to have rational policies. We've got to have policies that are not driven by politics, but by science and by careful consideration of the interests of Americans, both domestically and globally. And I think we have an opportunity to be heard in the next few months, and we should really think carefully about what that means.
Very good point. Very good point. Dan, this is all about trying to stay financially viable, whether you're a farm, or you're a Main Street business, you're a corporation. So when you talk with your members of the cooperative network, what are they learning? How are they developing new plans to try to stay resilient? I mean, I don't know that anybody's got a whole lot of answers, but how are they strategizing to stay financially viable in this uncertain time? And what do they say they need to be a going concern?
Well, Pam, that's a great question, and it's a very difficult one. Obviously, we've gone through 5 to 6 years of an economic downturn in the rural community and in agriculture. And just as we were starting to see some light on the and at the end of the tunnel, along comes COVID. So it's kind of been a period of resetting. There is only so much we can do for improved efficiency. I think it probably gets under a lot of farmers' skin a little bit when they keep being told to cut costs and be more efficient. Any farmer that's still farming has already done that. And there's only so much of that you can achieve. We need profitability. The bills have to be paid. The co-op has bills just like the farmer. The electric co-ops, I saw a figure of how much the electric co-ops are losing through this from closed down factories and just the lack of economic activity going on that's really showing up on the bottom line of the co-op, of the electric co-ops. So every one of our co-ops is facing this lack of profitability, this financial struggle we are seeing in rural America. And another thing, I don't think the idea that we need more loans is going to help. We have a profitability problem, not a debt problem. We've had low interest rates for years. We've had record low interest rates. Luckily, we've had high land prices, which has allowed farmers to have the equity to roll over operating losses into longer term mortgages. But that's a dangerous slope to be on, and you can only do that for so long. There is little answer, there is little way out of this without profitability. Ian mentioned the Band-Aid approach. So we are putting dollars into farmers' pockets. Those dollars will be spent in the rural communities. That will pay the local vet clinic and the co-op bill and those things. So that's wonderful. And $50 million is a lot of money. And it's going to be very appreciated. And it's very important that we have that. But let's not confuse the Band-Aid with the long-term diagnosis and cure that agriculture and our rural communities are still searching for.
Absolutely. Cal, I know you have this conversation quite often. I mean, and I saw you nodding when Dan said farmers being told to be more efficient. You just want to slap them alongside the head because everything you do is about efficiency. But let's talk a little bit about the terrain for Wisconsin agriculture. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but there's a lot of concern out there on what Wisconsin agriculture is going to look like after we recover. Is it going to be large farms? Is it going to be a healthy mixture? what is best, what is the most economically viable. What do you hear when you're with fellow corn growers, fellow farmers in general? I don't know of a piece of good farm ground that's not fought for competitively by a lot of different folks. But what do you see Wisconsin agriculture looking like when hopefully we get past this?
Well, I think Dan is right on target there. And we've done the same thing in our operation. We've refinanced land that's got value to it to offset losses that we've had in production the last few years. And we've got to get away from that. Once we get away from that and become more profitable, then we're going to attract younger people back into the business. Back 10 years ago, when we had $7 corn and $25 milk, we were getting a lot of the young people attracted back into the business. But when the bottom went out of this 3-4 years ago, a lot of those people left agriculture again and went to different jobs. And we've got to get agricultural more profitable. What I've seen with some of the smaller dairy farms around our area is the guys have gotten rid of the dairy herds, but they put in smaller beef herds to offset some of the feed that they're producing on the farm. And we've got to have more small packing plants around Wisconsin. We've been in the quarter and half beef market for close to 12 years ourselves, and we developed a pretty good customer base. And first, we were a couple months out, then it got to be 3 to 4 months, and we started losing some customers. I've got one packing plant or slaughter plant that we've used that's out till January of 2022. Wow. Not 21, but 22. So the calf that dropped on the ground today doesn't have a place to get processed, and that's scary. And so that's one thing going forward in the future for young people that want to be involved in agriculture, even if they're not in production agriculture. I think that we need to look at doing some processing. Here at home, my son-in-law is a shift supervisor at a large cheese plant in Portage. They've had their ups and downs because of the restaurant business not being there, but things are coming back for them. They're working Saturdays again now, which he doesn't like, but they're having to do it to keep up. And, I think that we're seeing some resurgence, but we've got to be able to put some profitability back on the farm, if we're going to continue agriculture here in the future. I don't care if it's large farms or small farms. Large farms just means you lose a lot more money in a month, whether you're milking cows or selling corn.
Yeah, very good point. I want to stay with that finding profitability theme and you, Cal. A lot of different venues that farmers are looking at to try to find that profitability. And some of it's based on the value of your land, not what you can grow on it, but what's in it, carbon sequestering. Also, we're seeing more investment in solar powers on farmland and ground across Wisconsin. What do you think? How are those what you consider to be viable ways of looking at diversifying potential profitability for farms?
I'm more excited about the carbon sequestration and being able to plant cover crops and hold the soil, because the soil is our resource. That's what makes our farms profitable, whether you're growing crops or feed for livestock. To me, that's the best option. I'm not 100% sold on solar farms. I think solar is a good way to go, but to put acres and acres into panels, and then if they're abandoned, what do you do with them? There's a lot of questions with that. So, I'd rather see us develop some profitability centers in carbon sequestration than go to some of the other alternatives. But I think being a little more diversified, and you've got to, again, we go back to high-speed internet. You got to find out what the newest, latest, greatest technologies that are coming down the pike and how to make them work for your operation, no matter what size and scale you are.
And I'll just remind you that the clock tells us we've got about 10 minutes left for this great virtual session. I appreciate it if we'd continue to just keep an eye on the clock. Dan, are your cooperatives and other partners ready to invest in things like carbon sequestration? And we already know that the solar and wind farms are up.
I think they are, Pam, and I think, you know, we tend to let things get really bad before we're commit to making a change. And I see that commitment to change across all of our cooperative sectors. It's funny that we have such a success story in Wisconsin agriculture, $105 billion industry, but we have so much trouble, as Cal mentioned, bringing the next generation in. That's because it's really hard to transition a business that's in the red. We have to get the cash flows straightened out in agriculture so that now we can reinvest. We need a reinvestment in Wisconsin agriculture, again, as Cal said, in the processing and distribution end of it as well, not just on the farm. Because for many, many years, we have not had a production problem in agriculture. We've had a profitability problem. And only until we can address the profitability problem can we have a strong and vibrant agriculture where we're not losing farm families and rural businesses every year.
Janis, let's talk a little bit about that message, how it resonates at the Capitol. I mean, God bless people like you that do have a connection with what really happens on a farm as opposed to what they did on an internet search last night to find their knowledge. Talk to me a little bit about that message. You know, when you start talking about large versus small in Wisconsin, it is a problem. If it's about profitability, maybe we get back on the same page. What do you see the role of state government in trying to help assist with that profitability goal, not just necessarily writing checks?
Well, that's really a tough area, Pam, because in my district, I have farms of all size. I have large CAFO farms with up to 8,000 cows. I have a little grass-fed producer who has 50 cows and everything in between. And I think right now, profitability and sustainability are those biggest questions. Do we need to go to a stronger regulation of supply versus demand? And I know no one's going to be happy about that if they're told you can't produce more than X gallons of milk. But we have to find a happy medium somewhere. And when I was on the Dairy Task Force 2.0, those questions did come up. And there was a strong desire amongst the members of that committee and the people that they meet with regularly, their colleagues in the agricultural community, to find those answers. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Dairy Innovation Hub was approved for the University of Wisconsin, so we could take a deep dive look at those issues and try and find some common solutions that work for everybody, not just the big guys push the little guys out. That's not sustainable. There's room for everyone, but we do need to find answers to that profitability measure, and that has not been working the last several years, as we all know. So I do not have the perfect answer, but I think it's good that the Innovation Hub was created so that we can look at all the options and try and come up with the best solutions. And it's not going to happen overnight, we're aware of that, but yet we have to start somewhere. And hopefully listening to everybody from all the different aspects of agriculture. And as I said, it's not just the dairy, it's the grain crops, it's the fresh vegetable producers, it's everything, it's the CSAs. We have a large variety. And in fact, I'm hearing from my CSAs and small producers that they are being sought out by more urban people right now because they want to buy local. So the word is getting out that small farming is advantageous. So where we end with it all is going to take some time, but listening to each other and trying to come up with solutions that are good for everybody is really where we need to be right now.
I agree. I don't think I've ever seen my audience of all backgrounds and all demographics be more engaged with where their food comes from, wanting to know their farmer, wanting to connect directly. So you're right on that, Janis. All right, Ian, you little rascal, you've been so pessimistic on everything. I want you to wrap us off today by giving us some bullet points on how Wisconsin is poised to capitalize on possibilities in COVID-19 with our infrastructure in agriculture, our diversity of agriculture, both as far as operation size as well as commodities. Give me a little something positive, Ian.
Well, you know, Pam, I'm from the dismal science, right? So you're asking the wrong person for positive stuff. You know, there'd been Cal and Dan and Senator Ringhand have made really, really good points, I think, on prospects for the industry. I want to just add one thing, and it's something that we all know, but maybe sometimes overlook when we're thinking about agriculture, and that is that for the vast majority of Wisconsin farms, small farms, I should say, Agriculture is only one part of their portfolio of income opportunities, right? And, you know, all of us know that on every small farm, you've got somebody who's engaged with the farming operation and someone else in the household who is working outside of the farm. They're working for government in many cases, or they're working in another local industry that may or may not be related to agriculture. So when we think about profitability, it's really important to consider the agricultural operation. But for households, what really matters is a diversified portfolio. And that diversification, I think, is one of the strategies that small farms in particular have to be thinking very carefully about, because if you're going to have a big shock to agriculture that's affecting agricultural profitability, then one of the margins of response is to think about how the total income of the household is generated. And on that, I want to, I guess, just highlight one really important thing, and that's we come into summer in Wisconsin. We know that we've got an awful lot of our friendly Illinois brethren who like to come up here and go fishing and camping and stuff like that. Tourism is a very big industry in Wisconsin. It accounts for about 8% of jobs in Wisconsin. And it's very seasonal, of course, but it matters a great deal. And so the health of the rural economy depends not only on agriculture, but on these other industries, and tourism is one of the really big ones that it depends on. And I guess that just brings me back again to this kind of the idea of, you know, how fast should we open up? If we manage our public health scenario, then we have a better chance that our tourism industry will also recover quickly. If we mess up on public health, then people are not going to want to come camping and fishing and hanging out in Wisconsin during the summer. And that is going to be an economic peril, at least as great as what's happening in the agriculture sector itself. So I would say one of the keys to success and to moving forward is to think holistically about this, especially in a very, very diversified economy, such as the Wisconsin rural economy is.
Well, and to your point, it's not just about getting it right. It's also about staking our reputation, our image that we've spent so much time both in Wisconsin agriculture and Wisconsin tourism to build. I appreciate that. And I guess that's about as positive as I can expect from you, Ian. Good job. Thank you so much again for all of your questions as well. If we did not get a chance to address them live here on our conversations, I'm sure that our panelists will be happy to try to follow up with you directly after we're concluded. I appreciate all of my esteemed guests. And Jeff, thank you very much for the opportunity to delve a little deeper on what's happening with Wisconsin agriculture relative to now COVID-19, not just China.
Thanks very much, Pam. I'm going to just close it out here. I want to thank everybody involved. Pam, I loved what you said there about there's never been more awareness or more of a connection between the consumer and the farmer and the food producer. I think that I'm going to say that's a positive out of this, all this COVID mess. But anyway, I want to thank Pam, especially want to thank our panelists, UW-Madison economist Ian Coxhead, Dan Smith, the president and CEO of Cooperative Network, Senator Janis Ringhand, member of the Senate Ag Committee, Cal Dalton, member of the Board of United Wisconsin Grain Producers, an ethanol plant in Friesland, and a corn grower and cattle farmer from Endeavor. You folks were great. I think we covered a lot of territory, and I think the interest of those who registered and the questions makes me think we can do another one of these in a couple months or in a few months to check the temperature of where we're going. Also want to thank our partners in this, the Waggett. The partners in this are, let me just go to the sponsors first, sorry. The Wisconsin Farm Bureau, the Wisconsin Biofuels Association, the Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training, and our partners, WIPS, the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Services, and the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thanks everybody for being involved in this, and we'll see you again soon.